The Trump administration has begun the process of officially exiting the Paris Climate Agreement. On Tuesday, the U.S. formally notified the United Nations that it would withdraw from the accords. Under the deal, nearly 200 countries pledged to cut emissions in the hopes of limiting global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. President Trump had first announced his intentions to exit the agreement back in June 2017. But this past Tuesday was the first possible day to take the action under the rules of withdrawal. In a tweet, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrote, quote, "The U.S. is proud of our record as a world leader in reducing all emissions, fostering resilience, growing our economy, and ensuring energy for our citizens. Ours is a realistic and pragmatic model." Amy Harder covers energy and climate change for Axios. She joins me now from our Washington bureau. Thanks very much for being with us, Amy. The formal process of exiting the accords will be completed November 4th, 2020, one day after the presidential election. If a Democrat were to win that election, would they be able to reverse this move?
No, because the next president, if it is a Democrat, won't become president until, of course, January 20th, 2021. So it's likely that if a Democrat wins, Trump will follow through on the withdrawal process, in which case it just creates a bit of a bureaucratic obstacle for the next president. You would then have to issue a letter to the United Nations asking to get back in. There's about a month waiting period for that. So if a Democrat wins, we could expect America to be back in the Paris Climate Accord around February 20th, 2021.
2021. All right. Well, besides the United States, are other countries on track to meet the climate targets necessary to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius?
So, no, because most of the goals that countries have put forward, China, for example, is actually on track to meet its goal that it put in there. But the problem is all of the commitments that countries have put forward do not add up to that goal of reducing emissions to limit temperature rise to 2 degrees within this century. And that's part of the reason why the Trump administration is opposed to the Paris Agreement, because they think that it gives China the freedom to continue to emit. Now, that's not really true. It puts them on a pathway to lower the growth of their emissions. But nonetheless, it's not that the commitments that countries have put forward are actually, some are meeting them. It's the problem is that the goals themselves are not aggressive enough.
Well, meantime, you have a new piece out today about the rising sea levels that have already been locked in by global warming. What did this research find, and why are the effects irreversible?
Right. That's part of the sticky issue with a problem like climate change, is that it's both cumulative and in part irreversible. So what this research shows is that vastly larger portions of the global population are going to be at risk of living in areas that will be high tide, below the high tide line, within the next 30 years. And most of this is concentrated in Asia, which is where the global population is growing rapidly, and where cities are concentrated on the coasts. And the reason why it's sort of baked in is, imagine if you unplug a freezer. The food takes a while to thaw, and then it takes a while to spoil. So that's why there's this delay, on a decade time frame, decades-long time frame. But nonetheless, what we can hope for is that between now and 2100, we're talking 80 years, if we begin to slow emissions now, we can limit the flooding and the sea level rise that will occur in 80 years.
Well, so you mentioned Asia in particular, but what impact will those rising seas have on those populations that are in those low-lying areas especially?
Well, it all depends on what cities do to prepare for this. And it really is a cities-led problem, as opposed to reducing emissions is really a country and global level problem, but then responding to the warmer world that we will inevitably live in is a very local problem. So it's important to know that some coverage has said that cities will be wiped off the map. That's not necessarily the case, and we already have 110 million people in the world living below the high tide level. New Orleans is a good example. It's to what degree do you prepare and have levees and things like that. But also, as as we've seen in New Orleans when big storms hit, that sometimes those can fail. So there's only so much living below high tide that is really feasible. So I think it's a mix of some people relocating and also really planning for what is inevitably going to come, as opposed to just looking at reducing emissions.
Right, a lot of difficult choices ahead for particularly local policymakers. Amy Harder, Amy, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.